There we go. What we're going to discuss tonight. Uh, we're going to discuss a number of covers, and I've tried to bring a large assortment, but I'm not going to bore you with hundreds of covers. I only have 15 or 16 slides. I tried to narrow down to a handful, but I think we're going to cover the waterfront if I do my job properly. Please ask questions. I will attempt to answer them. And if I can't answer them, I'll just make up answers. So I do that all the time. So, don't hold me to any of the answers, but I'll do my best to try to answer them. The first thing you're looking at is a picture postcard of the Lancaster post office a long time ago, approximately about 1909, 1910, based on the type of postcard. I collect a lot of postcards, particularly Pennsylvania related. I try to collect all the postcards I can get of all the Pennsylvania postcards. And trust me, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of Pennsylvania post office postcards. So it's always a challenge. They keep seeming to pop up every day on eBay. There's another one that I don't own. So it's an ongoing, everyday process. But I love the old postcards from 1902, 03 through about 1920. I tried not to go too much past 1920. 1902 to 1920 is generally referred to as the golden age of postcards. And it really was a golden age. Paul, next slide. We'll try this again, Paul. We're going to get good at this. What I've tried to do tonight is also select from a number of exhibits. I've produced over 70 exhibits, 50 or 60 of them for myself and 10 or 20 for other people. This is from one of my exhibits, the 17-cent rate exhibit, and it really shows the early stampless covers. I'm not going to talk all about stampless tonight, but postal history is made up of a lot of the stampless period. Stampless is pre-George Washington, through George Washington, up through and including the Civil War. There was still stampless during that time period. So you're really talking a good 150 to 200 years from colonial to pre-colonial to post-colonial to post-George Washington. And I tend to think of these time periods sometimes in presidential. Who was the president when certain things took place? I'd like to think of it more about the postmaster generals, but it's easier. We all know the presidents, and it's a little easier for people to relate to, oh, that was George Washington, or that was the Thomas Jefferson time period. So the first cover at the top of this page is a double rate, 34 cents, so it's 2 times 17, from Albany, New York in 1814. The 1814, 1815, 1816 is a wonderful 3-year time period in the world of stampless covers, because you had 2, if not 3 rate changes, if you will, due to the War of 1812. So it makes for an exciting time period, that 1814 to 1816 time period. So I'm personally, as a collector of postal history, always interested in that 3 or 4 year time period. Paul, next one.
That wasn't good.
No, keep going. You were doing good.
I was.
Yeah, you 2 in a row.
You're going to fire me. Okay.
There you go. Early on, I wanted to show you a cover with stamps, because one of the things that when I talk about postal history, the stamp collectors out there always go, but you didn't show us any stamps. And I understand that emotion. I was a stamp collector. I'm not just a postal historian, but I do love stamps too. And we all do. And it's the backbone of the hobby. So I tried to pick out an interesting cover from Grove City, Pennsylvania, and Mercer County, PA. I happen to have attended Grove City College, and it's where my wife was born and raised, Grove City. So it's a natural collecting thing for me to focus a little bit on Grove City, PA. The town has about 8,000 people now. Doesn't change very much, seems to stay the same. Originally it was called Pine, and then it changed to Grove City, and it's been Grove City for a long, long time, about 160 years. Covers from Grove City in the early years are not easy to find because it was a small town, small population, and it was in western Pennsylvania. Not exactly, it's about 70 miles north of Pittsburgh and about 60 miles south of Erie, adjoining Ohio. The western border of Mercer County is Ohio, and the closest town in Ohio is Youngstown in terms of cities. Paul, next one. See if you can do it this time, Paul. You're muted. There you go. One of my little specialties is higher rated covers. I was always a sucker for higher rated covers, so I picked out two $1 rates. These are from an earlier time period in the 1830s. And think about what $1 would buy you today. These are, $25, $30 covers in terms of value of postage today, the equivalent of express mail, if you will, today. They went from Philadelphia in the upper left to Columbus, Ohio, and then the bottom one is from Savannah, Georgia, to Philadelphia. These were sort of an attempt, if you will, of Eastern Express mail in its own way to try to get mail to move quickly. These were heavy covers. They were paid. Stampless covers for the longest time were based on the number of pages and the distance. So these were thick covers. These probably contained, 4 or 5 pages, and you paid for that. They didn't have a flat rate. Postage stamps solved that problem in 1847. I always like the higher rated ones. I've seen them as high as $24, $28. I have a few myself in the $3, $4, $5 range. And you think about what that amount of money was in the 1820s, 1830s, it's pretty startling. And keep in mind, it was based on distance and the number of pages. One of the things that always interests me about stampless covers in the postal history regarding them is the additional markings. You can see the paid hand stamps, particularly on the bottom one. Most of the mail prior to the use of postage stamps went what we would call or think of as COD. The receiver paid for it. And how did somebody know they had mail at the post office? You read it in the newspaper. And what did it say? It said, "You've got mail." So the techies who came up with the "you've got mail" email thought process were only about 150 years late on the terminology, because we've been saying "you've got mail" for a long time. So it's always fascinated me that you would read your local newspaper and then go to the post office, get your mail, pay the postmaster for the receipt of the letter.
Can I ask a question about the cover at the top, your first cover? Can I ask a question?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, because I see it's $1, but I think I see on that next to the Philadelphia CDS 1 ounce. So that's 25 cents, right, for the rate inland to get from Philly to Columbus, but it was 4 times, right, 4 sheets or 4 times the weight. That's why 1 ounce, which gives it $1. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it went a long distance, 411 miles.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
And the country was small then. I mean, 411 miles was a long way then. The cheapest rates were for 30 miles. So you have a sense of, it was a small country in terms of mileage. We hadn't expanded too far westward yet at that point. All right, Paul, next cover. I selected one of these from my WESTTOWN collection. WESTTOWN is a local boarding school. It's the second oldest continuously operating secondary school in the country. It's right here in Westchester, located near Westtown. It's about 4 miles from where I'm sitting right now. It's still operational. My favorite story about Westtown, though, is a personal one. I was asked to speak on the Westtown local at the Sarasota Stamp Club. This is 10 years ago or so. And I said, well, I'm going to talk today at my opening remarks to the Sarasota Stamp Club. I said, I'm going to speak about the Westtown local. And I bet you there's nobody in this room, and there must have been 40 or 50 people in the room, that knows where Westtown is. And a hand shot up and a lady said, not only do I know where it is, I graduated from Westtown. So it's a small world out there. The Westtown Local is a small label, pretty famous, usually, but not always, applied to the back of the cover. And that's what makes collecting these somewhat fascinating and possibly very beneficial for all of us that like to go through the dealer boxes, and most of us do enjoy that. So the Westtown Local, while it's applied to the back, a lot of times it's just a regular 3-cent number 65 or whatever, US Scott number 65 on the front, or 26 possibly. And the reality is the dealers don't necessarily, when they're pricing these, notice the Westtown Local on the back. So you can sometimes buy a Westtown Local for $5 or $10 for a very routine cover on the front. The Westtown Local brings the value up to $250 or more. I've seen a Westtown Local cover go for $3,000 in a Siegel auction, though it was pretty spectacular cover. My lecture part of this, and for including it, is I always say to people, turn the covers around. You don't know what's on the back. Always look at the back. You may be getting yourself a real bargain. There's other things in the world of philately that are sometimes on the back, auxiliary markings and the like. So turn them around, folks. A lot of times the more interesting things are on the back of the cover. The Westtown Local was used to move the mail about 5 or 6 miles from Westtown to the Westchester Post Office. It was the students mostly and the faculty mailing letters, because at that time they didn't have a Westtown post office. Later on, they had the Street Road Post Office, which became the Westtown Post Office. The Westtown Post Office is still operational. We had 256 post offices at one time in Chester County. We're down to 52 operational post offices at this time, and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. I would think in my lifetime we'll get down to about 40 or 45. And the way they're doing that, it appears to me, at least in Chester County, is when the postmaster or postmistress retires, they don't replace them and the post office gets absorbed. 20-some post offices already have been merged into the Westchester Post Office, as an example. Paul, next one. There you go. I included this one for our friend Hal Klein up in Lebanon. Had to do a Lebanon one just for Mr. Klein. Lebanon is one of the 67 county seats. All of you know there's 67 county seats in Pennsylvania. They haven't changed since 1863. They've been the same 67 county seats, because why would you bother to change them? Yeah, it's amazing that there's 67 courthouses. When you needed 67 courthouses, you needed them because it was horse and buggy. It was horseback. We get cars and trucks and trains and planes, and we still have 67 courthouses. So things just don't seem to change in that world. But Lebanon's one of those courthouses. I happen to have done an exhibit on the oval cancels of Pennsylvania. Wonderful little sub-hobby. Love oval cancels. You can see the Lebanon there. It's kind of an unusual marking. A lot of stampless covers have fascinating markings, including ovals and boxes and circles and straight lines. And you can really get excited, if you're a postal historian, about the markings on a stampless cover. This is a nice Lebanon oval cancels. Oval cancels for a lot of places are fairly common, but for other places, other post offices, they can be pretty darn scarce. It's tough to get all the oval cancels of Pennsylvania in one collection. It could take you a long time. I happen to love this Lebanon marking. Paul? I put this one in North Liberty. One of the reasons I wanted to include this is in Mercer County. This is about 5 miles from where my wife grew up in North Liberty, in Liberty Township, Mercer County, not too far from Ohio. North Liberty was a tiny, tiny little post office. It's a tiny little village then, it's a tiny little village today. It never, I don't think it ever had a stoplight, a red light. It might have had a stop sign at its heyday. So North Liberty covers are tough to find, but I can tell you there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little towns spread across the state of Pennsylvania that make for fascinating collecting, and North Liberty is a good example of that. This is a 5-cent in an oval. This comes from an exhibit I did on enclosed postage rates of the 5 cent. The 5-cent marking is fairly common because that became the less than 300-mile rate, 1845. And the 5-cent rate, of course, transferred to the Scott #1, Ben Franklin 5-cent stamp, our first U.S. stamp. North Liberty is an interesting little town in that it is tiny. And that's one of the things that always fascinates me about postal history. You can learn from the acquisition of a small cover from a small place in Pennsylvania. It forces you to learn and to write them up properly and to study them and to research them. These small towns provide a great learning experience. I mean, we all like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Lancaster, Scranton, Harrisburg, etc. But I sure can get excited and charged up over the small little towns like North Liberty. So none of you knew about North Liberty before is a good bet. Now you know where North Liberty is, and now you all want to go there. But don't blink, you'll miss it. Paul, next one. Sure, why not orange? Well, this is kind of funny to me, and I'm sort of embarrassed by this. But I figured, well, why not share my embarrassment? The Houston Stamp Show, not a World Series show, but a very serious regional show, happens every year, usually in the September timeframe. It probably should be a World Series show like Napex and Nojex, etc. But they've decided to keep it a regional show. That's their choice. They don't have to become a World Series of Philately show. But to spice up their show, every year at the end of one show, they pick a color out of a box of crayons. They pop open a new crayon box. Probably, by the way, those crayons are made in Pennsylvania. And they blindfold somebody, usually the grand award winner, and that person picks out next year's color. Well, one year they picked out orange. And I said, oh, I got to do orange. I'm going to enter an orange exhibit. And I said, but my orange exhibit's going to be different than all the others. I'm going to do it orange subjects, but I'm going to do it using gradations of orange in the exhibit. It has to be single frame. So I did a single frame orange exhibit. And what I did, on the left-hand border, the orange came in from the left. On the right-hand border of the frame, the orange came in from the right. And from the top, this is one of the top ones, the orange comes in and goes pale from the top and the opposite from the bottom. So dark orange at the bottom and then lighter. And then the 4 pages in the middle had very little orange of the 16 pages. So this is from the top, if you will. The orange wasn't well received by the judges, to say the least. They hated it. I've only shown it once in Houston. I've never shown it again. It didn't do well at all, even though the covers are pretty nice. I mean, they're nice stampless covers in most cases, though the whole exhibit's not all stampless. And I tried to show about 30 or 35 covers from all the towns in the country that have the word orange in them. And some of the more famous ones, of course, is Orangeburg Courthouse in South Carolina. And there's a bunch of oranges in New Jersey. There's certainly a couple in Florida. And there's 1 or 2 in California promoting their agriculture. And we even have a couple oranges in Pennsylvania. I even had a wonderful Civil War cover in this exhibit. So I decided to sell this exhibit, and I sold it through Schuyler Rumsey in San Francisco. And believe it or not, somebody bought the whole exhibit. So a couple years go by, and I'm judging in Minneapolis, at the Minnesota show. And what's in the frames is this orange exhibit. Because one of the rules is you can buy an exhibit, and if you wait 2 years or more, you now theoretically can exhibit it. It's yours. You own it. And that's really the only rule in exhibiting. You have to own the material, but you can't buy it one day and exhibit it the next. There's a little time frame. It's usually 2 years. So I had to judge this orange exhibit as a judge, knowing I produced this exhibit. So I had a choice. I could judge it with my fellow jurors, or I could recuse myself. So I recused myself and felt a little better about not having to judge my own ugly orange exhibit. So my suggestion is, if Houston appeals to you and you want to do something with a color, go ahead and do it, but don't do the pages in the different colors. Judges don't seem to appreciate the creativity. I personally thought it was a stroke of genius. By the way, there's only one printer I found out that can print perfect orange, and that's the Canon. No other printers can print perfect orange. They print orange, but they're not very good oranges. And you can see from this picture, and this is a scan of a scan, if you will, this is pretty good orange. It's a nice orange. I took it to a company in Westchester that had a Canon printer, and I said, "Can you do orange?" And they said, "Sure, we have a Canon printer." And I said, "Oh, I'm in the right place." Paul, next one. This is just an old cover from 1806. I just had this laying around, as we all do, little box, but it caught my attention the other day because it's 1806. It's old. It's not in great shape. It's got some staining and some markings. It's not torn, but it needs to be cleaned up and restored a little bit. But it's a nice Philadelphia circular date stamp in the left, and it's got a nice address. And to be honest with you, I wanted to show a cover from that 1806, if you will, time period. I also wanted to show one where you can see the wax seal. And of course, on the other side is the letter itself. And that's one of the great joys of stampless covers. And that's why this cover is shown here. So I can say what makes them really special is many of them, though not all, but many include the letter. So postal history not only shows the markings, the rates, the routes, and the markings, but also you get to read the letters. Unfortunately, I've been collecting stampless covers since 1970 something, and there's not too many love letters. Most of them are business letters. And so they're kind of boring. It's like, I sold you the buggy for $100 and you owe me the $100. So where's the $100? So there's a lot of collection and real estate transactions, and some legal transactions make up the bulk of them. They're still fascinating. They capture history and they tell a story, but the reality is they're not as exciting reading as one would hope. Paul? Postcards, one of my loves. This is an interesting from an exhibit I did on the Sharpless Separator Company in Westchester. At one time, the Sharpless Separator Company separated milk and cream. That's what they did. They invented a machine that became famous. They became the world's largest producer of cream separators. And Sharpless, a guy here in Westchester, invented the equipment, formed a company, and at one time he had thousands of employees in Westchester at their factory. He tended to like, for some reason, he created fairly humorous postcards for advertising for about a 10-year time period, roughly 1905 till about 1915. He went out of business in around 1922, and that was because another company in Sweden, Laval, came up with a better tubular cream separator. And that just proves, somebody always comes up with a better mousetrap. The postcard at the bottom is fascinating because it's the mansion he built and the gardens. It's called the Greystone. The building still exists. They hold banquets, they hold weddings, etc. But all the gardens that you see there on that postcard from 1912, it's now in the last 2 years been converted to condos and apartments and retirement. It's about 800 rooftops now are in that 600 or 700 acres that one time was the Greystone Mansion. Can't stop progress, but I sure miss those wonderful views of the Greystone Gardens. So, but we got the postcards to remind us, and this is a good example of postcard exhibiting, picking a subject and covering it from soup to nuts. And this exhibit has actually done pretty well on the exhibit scene. Paul? Another subject, one of the things that I tried to do with my exhibits a long time ago, I said I could do all postal history or I could do other things. So I decided a long time ago that I would try to do exhibits in the World Series of competition on using different methods. And this is the revenues. This one scared the heck out of me. I'm not a revenue expert. Ron Lesher is the revenue expert. If you have any questions on revenues, you send an email to Ron Lesher and he'll answer it. He knows everything about revenues. I know very little, so I decided to do the WESTTOWN CDVs, carte de visite. And from a postal history perspective, the rarest thing in the whole exhibit is the envelope in the bottom left there that held the CDV, and they would mail them out as souvenirs to their friends or advertisements for businesses, etc. So the rarest thing in the whole exhibit is the cover that held a CDV, a carte de visite. So it was a fun exhibit to do. It was challenging to try to tell a story with CDVs. Paul? Paul, I'm glad you take some time. It gives me a chance to catch my breath. Lancaster, got to include Lancaster when you're talking to Lancaster. So this is a one-page from an exhibit I did on the railroad. I did an exhibit from the railroad stops between New York City and Chicago. And of course, guess what? Lancaster's was one of the stops on that. And I tried to find the earliest cover I could find from each of the railroad stops. In theory, I was marrying up two concepts. I was marrying up the growth of the American railroad system westward from Philadelphia, New York, to west to Pittsburgh and Chicago, etc., and marrying up showing the growth of the postal system as well. I tried to tie the two together in this exhibit. I'm not sure it worked very well, but the idea was a clever idea. This exhibit hasn't done real well with the judges, partially because they're saying, what are you trying to do here? Are you talking about the railroad or are you talking about the post offices that were around the corner from the railroad? And of course, my position was, well, sometimes the post office was in the railroad station, but which wasn't always true. But I tried to defend my position by saying that. But it was fun trying to find all these covers. And there's like 40 stops between New York and Chicago, and became known, of course, as the famous Broadway Limited. The train still runs New York to Pittsburgh, and then you change trains today from Pittsburgh to Chicago, and you pick up in Pittsburgh the Capital Limited out of Washington, and that takes you to Chicago, and you can come back. So my exhibit showed a cover, the earliest one I could find, or phrased another way, the earliest one I could afford for each one of those 40 railroad stations along the Broadway Limited, if you will. The Pennsylvania Railroad, of course. Paul? Some serious covers. You got to show a few of these in a postal history talk. The top one is from 1775. I did an exhibit on the earliest post offices in Pennsylvania. And I basically said there's about 20 post offices plus, or minus a few, from 1775, pre-George Washington, to about 1850. These are the earliest post offices in Pennsylvania. And I said, I'm going to focus on those post offices. The bottom cover is, from 1790, from Philadelphia to New York City. Lovely markings. It's in pence and shillings, of course. This was before the dollar, and et cetera. And the top one is from Carlisle to Philadelphia, capturing the history of the state of Pennsylvania. Notice the addresses; they weren't very comprehensive. The top one gives the name of the person and the city, Philadelphia. It teaches you very quickly the city was small, and so was Carlisle then. So it was mailed and got to where it wanted to go, and it probably got there in about 3 days, faster than it does today. Paul, next one. Mailed to Lancaster. Had to include a few to Lancaster, of course. The top one is a very nice cover from Carlisle. That's a sawtooth example of a CVS. Very nice marking. To Lancaster, 10 cents single rate for under 40 to 90 miles distance. Keep in mind, number of pages and distance played a real role in the price of the postage. It was paid 10 cents. And then the bottom one was just on the same page, was Wilkesboro for Tom Bowman, who's joined us tonight, to was that Easton, PA. And I tried to show in this exhibit as many of the earliest post offices as I could accumulate, telling a story that there wasn't very many post offices in 1775, and there wasn't really very many till about 1810. And then it boomed. And from 1810 to 1850, we just exploded the number of post offices in this country. And that arc of the number of post offices, the census of post offices in those 40 or 50 years was just astounding. And we kept growing the number of post offices to about 1900. Now I'm rounding off the dates, but 1900. And then we started merging post offices, and we could merge them because of trucks and vehicles, and society changed, and postage rates went to 3 cents in the 1850s. So you had a lot of factors going on. Now keep in mind, we're talking, this is all pre-radio, pre-TV, no email. This is how people communicated. This was email in its rarest form in that time period. These are great documents. They capture history, and they remind us of what the society was really like in those early years. Paul, next one. And the last item, and I'll end my talk on this, mailed from Lancaster, and thanks so much for listening. It's been a pleasure. From an exhibit I entitled The Sweet 16. This is the earliest post offices of Pennsylvania. And of course, you got to do Lancaster. It was one of the earliest, and I put Lancaster on the title page of this exhibit. I couldn't think of a better cover for the beginning of the earliest post offices of Pennsylvania than a very nice cover from Lancaster. A nice solid 25-cent rate for the distance, and a nicely marked cover, easy to read, wonderful penmanship, and it helps tell the story of that Lancaster post office, which was opened in 1775, well before George Washington became president. And that's an important thing for us to remember. We had lots of mail before we had a country, and the mail just continued thanks to Ben Franklin and many others. So, Paul, I'd like to thank everybody. I'm happy to answer any questions. Keep in mind, I'll make up answers, but hang in there. Enjoy, and thanks so much. I enjoyed being with you again. It's always a pleasure to talk with the folks of Lancaster.
How about a virtual round of applause for Bill Schultz? I mean, again, who has just shown us some phenomenal material and taken us down a great journey of postal history. And let's open it up, please. Any questions for Bill?
All right, I got off the hook easy.
I see a thank you from on the orange exhibit, Bill. You've given folks ideas of maybe they will pick a favorite color and
Yeah.
they will go down that same pathway. I thought that was very interesting. Thank
Well,
you.
what I tried to do tonight with this selection was to try to joggle as many people as I could in thinking about what they could exhibit. You can really exhibit almost anything you want to if you set your mind to it and get a little creative, and don't let the rules press your creativity. Just have fun with it. You know, it's a wonderful hobby, and exhibiting is a wonderful experience. I judged Delpex this past weekend, and 5 people there had never exhibited before in that show, and that's a wonderful sign for us in the hobby to see people still wanting to exhibit.
Yeah, I want to ask a question.
It's a sharing of knowledge, and it's a sharing of what you've done, and it's sort of you're showing other people your thoughts, your ideas, and your creativity, if you will, and you're trying to follow the best practices that are in the manual. But keep in mind, there's only one rule: you got to own it. That's it.
That's pretty easy, Bob. We have another question, Bill, from Bob Karate. If you want to ask that question, sir, go right ahead, please.
Yeah, Bill, I enjoyed the presentation. I was wondering, for the last 25 years or so, I've been looking for a stampless cover from Hanover, Pennsylvania, where I live.
Yeah.
And I managed to find one. It has a very poor strike. And I've checked the, I guess it's the catalog on stampless covers, and they indicate that it's not a rare town to find a cover, but I've just never found one. There's plenty for Lancaster, New Oxford, and Gettysburg, and York, but I like I say, I've only found one in Hanover, and wonder if you have any in your collection.
I do have some Hanover. I'm surprised to hear you say that, Bob. I would think Hanover is fairly available. Now, what does happen at times is there may be an accumulator out there who's just buying up all the Hanovers, and the hobby becomes at times, unfortunately, and it's a sad joke or a sad story, we have to wait for people to die sometimes for stuff to come back on the market. But putting that aside, I would think that the Hanover covers are available. Are you listing it on eBay every day as a search?
Oh yeah, I've looked. Like I said, I found one maybe 3 years ago. It just that it has a bad strike.
Yeah.
But I've looked in countless auctions and through I go to several shows a year, and never. I just haven't been able to find one.
Well, Bob, the rest of us, the 30 or so that are here tonight, are now going to be looking for you for Hanover. I can't
I
tell
was going to
appreciate
say
that.
that. That's exactly what we're going to do, Bob. You share what you need. This group is going to go looking.
I must have 50 or 60 people around the country looking for Westchester for me. So I don't even have to look anymore. Stuff just arrives in the mailbox. So in a way, that's good. In a way, it takes away my search. But, I appreciate everybody's effort. I think you'll find some, Bob. I do. I really do.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bill.
Noble? Yeah, Bob Noble?
Question for you. One cover that you showed to Philadelphia
Yeah.
had no markings at all on the front. Was that a cover that was actually sent,
Yes. It was sent in a sense.
or was it just a copy?
No. These were all real. No copies. There was items during this time period that were hand carried. You would hand a letter to somebody and they would deliver it for you. Maybe you'd slip them a couple pennies, maybe you didn't. Maybe they did you a favor. Sometimes people say, oh, they were vest pocket letters. Some people call them hand carried letters. There's different terminology. But sometimes I also think that it did go through the mail, but the markings just failed to be placed on there. But I think that's more than likely they were hand carried by a private citizen. Like you say, you're living in Lancaster and it's 1776, and you tell your buddies in Lancaster, I'm going to Philly to market on Tuesday, and they go, could you deliver this to Dr. So-and-so on 3rd and Market in Philadelphia? And you would do that. You know, that's, people would carry letters. So
That, but that also was the way that they made copies of things as well, right?
yeah, they did.
There were no carbon copies.
Yeah, not at that time. No, they transcribed them. There was no equipment. We're talking no copy equipment, that's for sure.
Hey,
Next.
Bill,
Yeah,
this is Lou. The
Lou.
cover with the WESTTOWN stampless on the back.
yeah, the local on the back.
Yeah, the local.
Yeah.
It brings me back to the I don't know. I guess just maybe you'd add to it. When we had one of the shows at when we had one of the meetings at the Historical Society in Westchester, and
Yeah.
you graciously showed us the full sheet of those, and you know how they were just in the basement. Was that the story?
Well,
Bill?
they were in a vault, in a file, just thrown in a file. The full sheet, the only known full sheet of the WESTTOWN local, was in the vault, if you will, in a file room at the WESTTOWN school. They had no idea the value, and didn't care either, I don't think. And I called them up and said, I've heard via the grapevine, you've got a full sheet in the vault. And they said, oh,
These work really good, Kelly.
yeah, we got it in a folder here. And I said, can I borrow it for a show that I'm putting together? And they said, sure. And they hand carried it over that afternoon. I've had more than one expert tell me that it would sell on the market today for at least $300,000 or more. I wouldn't be surprised at $300,000 for the full sheet. $500,000 wouldn't surprise me either. So it's a one-of-a-kind item. When you start talking one-of-a-kind, we're talking big bucks. So, and it's almost in perfect condition. It really is. But it's been sitting in that vault for 150 years or more. But they thought it was just like, oh, okay. They had it like in a manila envelope. It's frightening.
I just remember, I remember that and some of the outstanding pieces that you had cataloged for them that were just down in the basement.
Yeah.
If I remember the story correctly,
That's right.
it just was amazing when we saw what was there.
I know.
And you can only imagine that this stuff is everywhere,
Well,
unknown.
Well, Lou, that's all of our dreams. We hope we find that stuff. We certainly hope it comes to light. You know, every year something comes to light. I mean, that's for sure. So, yeah, that was one of those phone calls where I said, you really have it? And they said, yeah, well, it's back. Guess what, John? I'm talking to John Halper now. John, it is. It's back in the same manila folder in the same file cabinet, and they don't have any desire to sell it or what. They know it now has value. I made sure they understood that, and I hope they're taking good care of it. But it's theirs. They can do what they want with it. I told them I'd be happy to keep it for them. Any other questions,
folks, for Bill?
Yeah. Any other questions? I got off easy tonight. I didn't have to make up too much of anything.
Not too bad. Well, that was excellent. I think you hit on just many aspects of postal history demonstrated through the covers you selected. That you selected very carefully. So thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
Very well done. Yep.
And I will stress, Bill, and I know you do, and I do as well. You got to turn your covers over and look inside.
Oh, yeah.
You just don't know what's on the back, and you don't know the contents. So when you're going through the boxes, make sure you just turn it over.
Yeah.
Really important, right?
You know, Charlie, and a lot of dealers don't even, very few of them look inside,
Yeah, correct, correct.
which is okay. They're in business and they're
Yes.
running their business the way they want to run them.
But for the historian in us, right, to find content and to be able to tell that story, that's a great day for many of us, right?
It is. It's great to find something, you know, is unique or rare or exciting, you know. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
thank you. Thank you again, sir. Just
All right, thank
fantastic.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
And,
everybody.
and Bill, I think many times the judges don't really have that good sense of humor. You're talking about your orange exhibit. I remember in graduate school, I had a friend in another college, and he got into real big trouble when he presented his dissertation because it was color coded on different colored pages, which to me makes sense. But
Yeah.
they didn't. It didn't amuse them.
No, I understand. Yeah, they didn't like my orange exhibit either.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, okay. Well, folks, thank you.